Hello and welcome to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're diving into Chapter 2 of our book, How to Be an Atheist, Why Many Skeptics Aren't Skeptical Enough by Stokes. And for Chapter 1, we took a look at Hume, and he made us doubt pretty much everything in our world, both our senses, induction, and all reasoning. So now we have to figure out why we should have beliefs at all if we're in this atheistic universe. So that's where we're starting in Chapter 2 for this. And as always, you can follow along with us, or you can just listen and soak in all the good information that Mr. Stokes has provided for us in his book. So we're kind of going to break it down. And the really good thing about this book is it's not dry and boring. It's really well laid out. If you've ever read any type of philosophy book, this one really has the headings really helped us along as we kind of broke it down within what we were going to talk about.
Yeah, so this chapter is kind of interesting. He labels it the Believing Primate, right? And
that's
so,
you.
That's all of us, me included. He says, we've seen so far that if we're going to take reason seriously, we're justified to question both sense perception and reason. So that's what we saw previously, right? That we have reason to believe if we're good skeptics, which is, an atheist should be a good skeptic, right? That we have reason to believe that we should take perception, how we perceive the world, and reason. We need to take skepticism about those things seriously. And so here's the next issue, right? He says, but even if we can't support the reliability of our cognitive, faculties with faculty-independent arguments, right? In other words, our cognitive faculties would be our perception and our reason. If we have to support reason with reason, which is a circular argument. We have to support perception only with perception, which is a circular argument. So those are not good ways to support those things. Yeah. So he says, but even if we can't support the reliability of our cognitive faculties, reason and perception, with faculty-independent arguments, there's something we can do.
Oh, good.
Yay! Yeah. Right? So here it is. We can at least work toward a coherent story of perception and reason, right? That is a story that provides soothing relief for all of our skeptical discomfort, however sober such skepticism may be. And so he says what we need then is an explanation of how humans came to have reliable cognitive contact with the world. If we can do that, then maybe we can get around the issues of the circularity of perception and reason, right? If we can have a good explanation about how we came to know these things. Now, what he says here is kind of interesting. He says, for explanations, we can't step outside of the explanation to check if the explanation, is correct. Yeah. And so the only thing that we can do is to see, do we have a coherent explanation? So he makes a distinction here, and this is kind of interesting. These are kind of theories of truth that he's getting at here. He makes a distinction between a correspondence theory, right, where how do I know that this perception corresponds to reality? He says we can't. We have to be skeptical about that, right? But the other issue is coherence. Do my beliefs, do my ideas fit together without contradiction? Maybe if we can get a set of coherent ideas and belief that fit together without contradiction, that'll give us some a way to, at least justify to a certain extent these particular issues that we're struggling with, perception and reason, right? So he says, let's see if we have a coherent explanation, one that fits together without contradiction, right? Now he says Hume didn't have one. Right, he didn't have an explanation.
Yeah, he was good at knocking down the pins, but couldn't stand anything else back up.
Right. So today he's going to suggest we have, evolution as an explanation, but Hume didn't have that. He wrote about a century prior to Darwin, right? So he says, other than the truism that we'd be dead if our cognitive faculties weren't dependable, right? There wasn't much an unbeliever could say to explain why such faculties are reliable. But no, it's no longer the case. Darwin has come to the day. He's the atheist savior. In fact, Darwin has now give unbelievers everywhere an all-natural explanation for the dependability of our sense and reason, is what he says. In fact, he quotes Richard Dawkins here. He suggests that Richard Dawkins has notably said that it's finally possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist thanks to Darwin. So Darwin comes today. Darwin's explanation gives us now a coherent way to see that perhaps our faculties are reliable, our sense perception and our reason, right? All right, so what is the Darwin explanation? Well, first of all, he wants us to see at least there's two kinds of evolution with regard to what he calls our wetware, right? Our mental capacities, right? So the first issue that we have to question is, he says there's two separate issues: the origin of life and then the evolution of life, right? Where did life come from? And then from wherever it came from, how did it get to where it is today? Right.
So how did it start? And then once it started, how did it continue to improve and gain information, and then finally from the Princess and the Frog, or the Frog Prince, to the actual prince.
Yeah, right. And so he says, in the case of life's origins, the starting of it, the question is, how did lifeless matter come alive? He says, in the case of life's evolution, the question is, once life appeared, then in its simplest form, how did it get greater and greater with regard to complexity? Right. Evolution proper, he suggests, addresses only the second question, right? The former question, he says, is a lot more difficult.
Right.
No dull. Right?
It rained on the rocks for millions of years, lightning struck it, and then ooze happened, and amino acids, and then they came together somehow, maybe.
Right. So what he said, and exactly that, or something like that. So he says life then is a freak accident, therefore, so too is it would seem then, if that's the case, maybe our cognitive faculties are freak accidents, right? In fact, he says some folks, this is a bit hard to believe, which brings us to the point of this chapter. If this all-natural explanation is correct, then there's reason to doubt the reliability of our cognitive faculties, or else doubt the claim that life arose naturally, right? So either we doubt that they're reliable, but if they're reliable, maybe then we would doubt that they arose naturally. So, right, either or there, right? So let me just go over that again, all right? The all-natural evolutionary explanation, if it's correct, he says, then there's reason to doubt the reliability of our cognitive faculties, because all of this came about by accident. It's a freak accident. Or else doubt the claim that life arose naturally. So either reliability or naturally. He's suggesting it's going to be difficult to have both.
Right. So like the tornado in the junkyard, it spins around, spins around, spins around, and at the end of it, there's a plane.
Yeah.
A working plane. Well, okay.
And we get on it, then do you want to ride on it?
Well, it's already been through one windstorm.
Yeah.
So how likely is it to have happened? And so if an atheist, if anyone were to look at that and go, okay, clearly you can claim that a tornado spun it around and out popped an airplane, but what is the likelihood of that happening? So small that mathematicians would label it as zero. So why is it when we come to life, here's the same type of, this has to happen, this has to happen, and not only for an organism, but for every preceding organism leading to the most complex of all organisms, which I think is the fern. Actually, it has more chromosomes than we do, or something like that. So how do you get all these different types out of a single cell, or the raining on the rocks, and it doesn't seem like any of that could happen. So how come we don't have the same type of skepticism for that as we do the airplane?
Yeah, good. And so now he wants to talk to, so evolution is the story. He wants to talk to us about, does that overcome the skepticism that he's been dealing with, right? This common sense skepticism.
So should we be skeptical of evolution? The problem of prohibitive probabilities doesn't so much arise if theism is true, right? So if we kind of believe that God exists, if we wanted to take a guided theistic of evolution, that's kind of easy. If you have an all-powerful God, he can make the jukes and the jive. He can mix the batter together when it needs to be. But if atheism is true, that unguided principle of it, it's really hard to figure out how that comes about. Right. He goes on to say, after all, naturalists must believe, as Dennett says, an impersonal, unreflective, robotic, mindless little scrap of molecular machinery is the ultimate basis for all the agency and hence meaning and hence consciousness in the universe. So those are big things. How did our brains come about so that we can have kind of superior thought of thinking of where's our place in the universe? The big questions in life. Yeah. How did that arise? If we're just here to continue the species, how come we're not only thinking of that? How did we come to try and find meaning? And people have different forms of meaning, and then also agency. How do we just act? And there's plenty of people out there who have this understanding of, well, maybe we are all determined. Maybe we are in the matrix, and so we're trying to have understand where those three come from. So he goes on to say, but even if we didn't go this far, unguided evolution is still hard for most people to believe.
Yeah. So he makes a contrast between, let's say, evolution is the explanation. Well, okay, that's fine, and we've gotten now from, we don't have a good explanation for how it started, but let's say, that evolution is an explanation. Well, maybe a plausible story would be guided evolution, right? Where you had a designer that guided the evolutionary process. The thing that's difficult, he's questioning here, is unguided evolution. Right. That's hard to believe.
Right. So if you have a God, and let's say evolution is true, he's making the jukes, he's making the jives, but unguided, it's just random chance. It's hopefully, the fish with legs comes out of the ocean and meets another fish with legs that comes out of the ocean at the same spot. They're able to reproduce. They like each other.
Which
the
has to be there.
Yeah, the one fish has gotten the box of candy and everything like that. And then they have children that reproduce. And then, within that pairing, hopefully there's more, so you can add genetic diversity in there. I mean, you can really take this, and that's just for one species. We're not talking about every single
thousands and millions.
But with a theistic viewpoint, that seems a little bit easier because you have an intelligence outside that has written the code. And so, of course, the code maker can make the computer program do what it wants, or can set it up so that it works properly. So that's what he's saying.
Yeah. So then, why is unguided evolution hard for most people to believe?
Yeah. So he really brings up two main points. So Nagel, who is just a fantastic writer in this and makes some really great points. He says that skepticism is not based on religious belief or any belief in a definite alternative. It is the belief that the available scientific evidence, in spite of consciousness of, consensus of scientific opinion, does not, in this matter, rationally require us to subordinate the incredulity of common sense. Incredulity being the state of being of being unable or unwilling to believe someone.
Right. So it's incredible.
Really hard to believe it.
Yeah. The common sense wise, common sense tells us, wait a minute, so all of this stuff happens by accident over and over and over again? Come on, right? Yep. That's kind of incredible.
Tornadoes in the junkyard, and many tornadoes in many junkyards, and all of that. Again, this isn't even the initial starting point. This is afterwards.
After it's gotten started. Right. Yeah. So incredulity is what he called it.
Incredulity is one.
Yeah.
And then Nagel goes on to say that it is also seems highly improbable that life as we know it is the result of a sequence of physical accidents together with the mechanisms of natural selection. We expect to abandon this naive response, not in favor of a fully worked out physical chemical explanation, but in favor of an alternative. Something better has to come along, because this seems really hard to believe.
Yeah.
So what is lacking, to my knowledge, is a credible argument that the story has a non-negligible probability of being true. Mm-hmm. So again, if you talk about probabilities, for an event to occur, probabilities come about. So what's the probability of me getting heads on every coin flip? Well, it's always going to be 50-50. Unless if I skew the data. So 50,
or the coin.
Yeah, exactly. But if I'm going to add every single bit of species and speciation and diversity and also all the cataclysms that happen, and we still survive to this day with functioning good things, beings that survive, it seems like all those probabilities added up together equals a big fat zero.
Yeah.
So it's incredulity and implausible. So it's really hard to believe, and it seems like the possibility of it happening is almost zero.
Yeah. And he ends by saying, so it isn't at all clear that evolution is anything more than a sketch of a theory, right? And even then, it's just he says a suggestive sketch, right?
And so too, I think this is one where it seems people want to put so much emphasis on evolution being the case, because the alternative theory is belief in a higher being, or there's no other third option.
Design,
really.
Right? Yeah. So it's either design or accident.
You can always take a step back and say aliens with pansperma.
Of course, but that's kind of design.
Yeah, but you're just because
we have an intelligence.
Where did the aliens come from?
Yeah,
and really, evolutionists believe that evolution, if it occurs at all anywhere else in the universe, occurs exactly or pretty much exactly how it happens here. I don't know how you can say that other than the fact that they themselves admit that it's so rare, it's so impossible, that the fact that it happens here, this was what Carl Sagan was talking about, of, if there's so much space out there, it seems hard to believe that that life would be out there, but if it did, it would look somewhat similar to us.
Yeah. Well, so what he wants to do now in this section on skepticism about our faculties is to say, now wait a minute. He says, we've obviously not given, someone might say, evolution a fair hearing. We've only ever so briefly mentioned why someone might be skeptical, right? So he says, let's do the gracious thing and assume for now that it's true, right?
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, so we can, so, all right, yes, there's a possibility that it didn't happen, or at least we can be skeptical about it, but let's just assume that it's true. On this assumption, he says, what reason would we have to believe that our cognitive faculties, again, we're getting back to all of these things that we do, memory, sense perception, reason, those are the things that we were skeptical about before. What reason do we have that to believe that those faculties are reliable? That is, what reason will we have to believe that these mechanisms produce mostly true beliefs? Right? Because that's what we need to have in order for the science and all that kind of stuff to work. We need that, or at least some would suggest that. Right? Yeah, some would suggest.
So again, going back to our tornado in the junkyard, the plane's there, and all the computers are functional, all the wires are there, all the fuel comes about. Yeah. So think of this as the internal mechanism. All right, let's say that we believe the tornado, we believe the junkyard, we believe the airplane. Now, how can we even believe that it can get off the ground?
Yeah.
Okay, it might look like an airplane, but does it taste like an airplane?
That's right. In other words, would you get in?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, he says the obvious reason is clearly the obvious reason that we can believe that our faculties are at least mostly true beliefs, that they produce these beliefs, is that we're here, that we've survived, right? That that we're alive, right? And so he says survival then seems to require that true beliefs happen. And since the aim of natural selection is survival, usually only those genetic mutations that provide survival advantage are allowed through the filter, he says. Natural selection ensures that our cognitive faculties are reliable. All right, so there it is. Yeah. Reason why we can believe that these faculties, memory and reason and perception, sense perceptions, are reliable is because we're here. Goodness knows, right? We have survived. We're alive.
It seems to work.
Yeah. Yeah. But he says there are reasons to think that survival doesn't require true beliefs.
And he's just a negative Nancy.
Yeah, wow,
right? Us up and knock us down.
Yeah, so he wants. Hey, let's pursue our skepticism, right? That's all he wants us to get. If you're saying you're skeptical, let's take it to its logical conclusions. Right. If we can be non-skeptical about logical conclusions, right? So he said, let's begin by noticing first that what matters for the survival of an organism is not beliefs.
Right.
What matters for the survival of an organism is the organism's behavior, right? No matter what I believe about the bus coming, if I step out in front of it, I will not survive. So my behavior, not my beliefs, he suggests, is what matters with regard to survival, right? And so that's the first thing. But here's the problem. Many organisms, perhaps most, he says, can do all the behavior stuff without any beliefs at all.
Right. I mean,
they don't need beliefs,
yeah.
Right? Much less true beliefs. Viruses, bacteria, he says, for example, are remarkably successful at survival with nary a belief to be found.
Right. Right? Yeah. I mean, the little flagella floating around.
Yeah.
The world's most complex motor just spinning there at 60,000 miles.
It does its thing. Yeah. Has no beliefs.
Yeah, no beliefs.
Yeah.
That we know of, I guess.
So beliefs aren't even needed for survival.
Right.
That's amazing. These viruses, bacteria, they don't have beliefs, as far as we know, and yet in fact, someone suggested if something happened, they would still be here if we were wiped out.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the way that evolutionists or atheists talk about it's always you reach back into the furthest recesses of your brain, and there's your reptilian brain, and it just does things. And again, it's harkening back to this idea that this primitive ape, primitive person, even before that, your primitive ancestors like the reptiles just have these responses, no beliefs, just I see a snake, I run away from the snake.
Right.
I see a chicken, I go eat the chicken. You just do things. Why am I doing this? Because of my reptilian brain.
That's right.
And so
programmed into.
Yeah, and so just somehow we have this autonomy, this consciousness to have beliefs on top of surviving, I guess.
Yeah. So beliefs aren't necessary for survival.
Right.
And secondly, true beliefs aren't necessary for survival, right? That's the second point, right? We don't need our beliefs to be truth. In fact, he quotes Patricia Churchland and says that she indicates truth, whatever that is, definitely takes the hindmost position with regard to survival, because we don't need true beliefs in order for survival. True beliefs, or any beliefs at all, he says, are a luxury and are superfluous bonus if survival is the real gold standard. You don't need beliefs, and you don't need true beliefs in order for survival. He says, at least if we're taking skepticism seriously, then, he says, these considerations undermine our confidence that evolution would require reliable faculties.
Yeah.
Right?
So I like the note that he has here at the bottom. Notice, too, that some mental illnesses, hallucinogenic drugs, and sleepwalking provides instances where people can successfully navigate the world with wildly false beliefs, or maybe even no beliefs at all.
Yeah.
You're sleepwalking, you survive.
Yeah.
Where are your beliefs in that?
Or you're on hallucinogenic drugs, right?
Yeah.
You have beliefs,
Yeah.
but goodness knows.
Yeah, the walls are melting.
Yeah.
I have that belief.
Yeah.
I believe it. I'm not going to go near melting walls.
Yeah.
I've survived.
Yeah.
So where are my beliefs? Okay. So then the next question is, should we be skeptical of even being able to do science, to look at the universe and know things about it from an internal, standpoint? So should we expect our faculties to be reliable on such topics as quantum mechanics, general relativity, superstring theory? I'm not even sure I could, define them, let alone expect to have it be reliable. Our brains evolved solely for the task of survival. That's the according to evolution, not for the construction of these complex theories, or any other things, any other things that go beyond an understanding of survival.
So even if we assume evolution is true and that our brains evolved to allow us for survival, we have the problem of we don't need beliefs. Beliefs aren't needed for survival. True beliefs aren't needed for survival. And we want to do science. How do we know, right, the reliability of these complex beliefs when we're doing science, right?
Yeah, so when we look up and out and look at the vastness of the universe and heat death and the number of galaxies in the universe and double quasar pulsars.
That's right. Black holes.
Yeah. I mean, how can we expect to look out or look in at these small, the form theories like quarks or superstring theory that postulates 222 different dimensions, or
even quantum mechanics.
Where you have your oscillations of spin and how that works. How can we have an understanding of the big things and the small things? It seems, as he says here, that that parts of the world uniquely described by general relativity and quantum mechanics, the very large and the very small, are not at all like this middle world, as Dawkins calls it. If unguided evolution is anywhere near correct, then our cognitive faculties were not crafted or calibrated for the unobservable realm.
Right. So the middle world is kind of where we live.
Right.
Our middle-sized perceptions and things like that we see every day, and that help us to navigate through life.
See something crawling through grass. I assume that's a snake. Let's go look. Yep, that's a snake. I've gotten bit. Now I've got a working theory, and after I die, my predecessors can come and study for more and figure out a scientific theory behind it. So, unfortunately, this realm occupies most of science, as we'll see.
The big and the small is what science is all about, not necessarily the middle.
Yeah.
And yet we have reason to believe, to be skeptical about these, extremely complicated beliefs about the big and the small worlds. Because even if we have evolved, and even if evolution is true, we've only evolved to survive in what he calls here the middle world, what Dawkins has described as the middle world. And so these ideas about the big, astronomy, general relativity, all that kind of stuff, and the small, quantum physics, then are way beyond the pale with regard to dealing with the middle world. How do we know those are reliable? Right.
It seems like if we're always looking up, we're going to run into that, saber-toothed tiger. And if we're always looking down at the small, that's when, the crocodiles are going to get us. So it doesn't seem like those who would look up and down would be able to look out and survive. He brings in Nagel once again, who we like, and says, evolutionary naturalism provides an account of our capacities that undermines their reliability, and in doing so, undermines itself. Mechanisms of belief formation that have selective advantage in the everyday struggle for existence do not warrant our confidence in the construction of theoretical accounts of the world as a whole. So even Darwin has doubts. With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the conviction of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. It's what we were saying there. Would any one of you trust the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? Mm-hmm. So, what makes us different than the monkey, other than the fact that it seems like we can formulate that we're different and we can be altruistic and look up and look down.
And so if we came from monkeys, then why would what would allow us to overcome the doubt that comes as a result of that source?
Yeah,
right?
and have it be for survival, because that's the point, is not just this thing arises, but it arises because you're best fit and naturally selected for your best environment. So.
Yeah, which is the middle world,
right,
and not the biggie, right? So even if we would suggest our cognitive faculties are reliable, they're only reliable for the middle world.
Right. So he says here at the end, it's not impossible that unguided evolution went beyond the call of duty, making us reliable about highly theoretical topics, but sober skepticism, again, what we should be, as
good scientists and logicians and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Doubting, but at the same time being willing to look. Skepticism, sober skepticism suggests that we should seriously doubt that this is the case.
Yeah, good. And so he ends this chapter. He calls this section "Saving Hume." He says, someone of a skeptical bent, then, has good reason to doubt that evolution could underwrite the reliability of sense perception and reason. That's what he's been picking on here the last couple of chapters, right? To put it differently, it's reasonable to think that Darwin provided Hume with only minimal help, right? So, kind of so sad, too bad. To Hume, we may have an explanation, but it's just it's a minimal help with regard to Hume's skepticism. But
people seem to want to grab onto it for all it's worth, because that seems to be the only other explanation.
Right. And that's the point he makes. He says, and yet the question of cognitive reliability has been quietly swept under the rug, right? Most naturalists, he says, for all their skeptical drum beatings, aren't interested in the issue of cognitive reliability, right? They're interested in something else. We'd have to, we would have thought that hard-nosed skepticism would be itching to follow reason along any path, right? And this particular path seems to lead us to the realization that we have no independent reason to believe reason other than the fact that we already do, and that we couldn't help it in any sense, right? So he quips, maybe possession is 9/10 of the law, right? We already have it, so we might as well own it, right?
Or we think we have it.
Yeah. Right. Perhaps naturalists see skepticism about our cognitive faculties as, maybe childish, he says, right? And perhaps that's the case, he wants to say. But in any case, in what follows, he tells us he wants to simply assume that our intellectual instruments then have impeccable credibility. So notice, he's giving over the arguments one at a time. He's just saying, okay, there's a problem here, but let's just assume it's okay. Well, even with evolution, let's assume it's okay, that life began from some kind of way, and it evolved to where it is today. We still have problems, right, with regard to our beliefs and whether or not they're true, even if because evolution tells us they're only for survival.
Right.
And if that's the case, then they don't need to be beliefs. We don't need to have beliefs for survival, and we certainly don't need true beliefs for survival. But let's assume that we have them. What about these giant beliefs that we get, these complicated beliefs, rather, that we get from science? Whoa, now we're going way beyond the pale. So we need to make sure that we follow skepticism everywhere it leads if we're going to be consistent skeptics. Right. We don't just say, but again, he's willing to say, okay, but let's just grant that we do have these true beliefs. Now where do we go from here? So that's what he wants to pursue in the next chapter with regard to science. Right.
Yeah. Right? So that's the next half of the book is science, and then running down all the all the different ways to be skeptical for science, and then we get on to morality. But yes, so science is our next several chapters as we continue on in how to be an atheist.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. So how do we be an atheist? We need to be skeptical. And once we find that we find ourselves in the skepticism, now all of a sudden we have all kinds of problems about atheism.
Right. So we're not going on. Evolution probably isn't true because of small probability and unlikelihood. We're granting different things so we can get to kind of what atheists believe, but we're still pointing out the fact that there are areas where they should be skeptical, and it's just adding up into more and more. It seems either a faith or it doesn't seem like they want to be skeptical.
Right.
But
In other
Mitch
words,
Stokes is calling it out and saying
right.
we should be more skeptical.
That's right.
Come with me. Follow me down the trail, down the path.
Right.
To
so the
skepticism.
subtitle of his book is, why many skeptics aren't skeptical enough.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And of course, I think he's making his case here.
Right. Yeah. So join us next week as we continue on and we figure out why we shouldn't trust in science.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Have a good day.